Hey guys, this is Andrew with High Level Reviews, and today I'd like to take a look at Final Fantasy Tactics. The game was developed and published by Square and was released in the United States in January of 1998 on the PlayStation. It was the first game in the Evil East world setting, which, as I've stated in other reviews, was created by Yasumi Matsuno, who eventually worked on Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy XII, both of which greatly expanded and enriched the world of Evil East. Despite being overshadowed by Final Fantasy VII's release that same year, in Japan that is, Tactics has still gained a fervently devoted fan base, so much so that a modding community dedicated to fixing bugs and balancing the game was still active in 2011, a whole 14 years after its release. Though it is tragically imbalanced and often less of a strategy game than a grind until you break the game fest, Tactics still contains the charm and intrigue the Final Fantasy series carries while still introducing the storytelling and narrative style that Matsuno would continue to employ throughout most of his career. It might be one of the more entertaining and involved stories in the strategy RPG genre. Though it is reviled by some for its radical departure from the numbered entries, both in tone and gameplay, the superb graphical presentation, twisting and deep story, and a layered and inventive job system that encourages experimentation have all helped cement Final Fantasy Tactics' cult status. Tactics, much like Matsuno's other works, is very difficult to discuss without spoiling major events. The game, in general, is teeming with betrayals and references to inadequately explained military and religious factions. There are many events that are simply not exposed outright to the player and must instead be accessed through rumors, which you find in towns, in the form of short paragraphs. These are very easy to miss, but do a great deal to help the player understand the complexities of the world and its history. The game story focuses on Ramza Beoul, and his importance and deeds during the Lion War and eventual erasure from the history books by the Kingdom's Church. Ramza, despite being of noble blood, grew up with a commoner named Delita. The early game ends up documenting their eventual split and highlights Delita's aggressive and extreme shift in personality and path. Delita attempts to manipulate the upper class in order to obtain the power he desires, while Ramza stubbornly and admirably clings to a rigid moral system that makes him often disregard class and rank in favor of honor and equity. I sometimes found Delita's dialogue hard to handle at times due to the near unrelenting cynicism and the manipulation of almost every character he came into contact with. Of course, this also could have been a localization issue. The game is well known for its horrid translation. Though, the writers did an excellent job of highlighting why Delita eventually snapped after a bevy of catastrophic events and a few scenes with one particularly harsh and miserable noble named Algus. Seriously. He's the embodiment of classism in this game, and the dialogue pulled no punches. It was difficult to read at times. And though I mentioned earlier his manipulation of the nobility, it would be very unfair to say that Delita was only a backstabbing conniver. His past and ambitions must be considered. Delita was an incredibly hard character to read, and a bit of an enigma throughout the game. In fact, I was more interested in him as a character than I was Ramza, despite Ramza's more noble and fair approach to political and existential strife. I don't often say this about single characters, but it's worth a playthrough just to witness the tragedy of Delita's story. After the second chapter, the game winds and weaves its way through so many disparate threads, eventually landing on the devil himself, that it's quite difficult to go any further without presenting some major spoilers. While I do wish the game hadn't relied on succinct summaries and shops to catch the player up to speed on loose ends or ill-explained plotlines, it's still one of the better stories in the strategy RPG realm. Due to the nature of the encounters and how major events are detailed, it's not easy to nail the pacing and tone in this genre. Not only did Tactics do that, it managed to compel the player to push through gameplay to experience the story when it's typically the other way around in strategy games. Of course, I say this and there are droves of people that only play Tactics for its combat. That's sort of the beauty of this game. While those disinterested or completely turned away by a tale that focuses on political machinations and broad, large-scale struggles probably won't be motivated to care about the story, it's still a branching and dark narrative with superb characterization that pulls you in from the opening scene. In fact, I'd say it's one of the more underappreciated and undervalued stories in the entire RPG genre. Encounters in Tactics take place in predetermined spots on a world map, either story-based or a truly random encounter. You move along the path by using a pointer to click on these locations, and while it is an initially odd and seemingly out-of-place function in the Final Fantasy series, it quickly grows on you and streamlines the experience. Battles take place on three-dimensional isometric fields. Though the camera isn't often an issue and provides zoom out and zoom in functions along with the ability to rotate it, my major complaint is that the characters are often obfuscated by terrain, and the limited views can be very problematic when trying to locate tiles the player needs to see in order to plan his or her next move. Characters move on square tiles, very similar to a giant chessboard with the occasional topographical barrier. You have your basic commands such as move, attack, wait, and then you have skills that are dependent on the classes you've mastered. Turn order is determined by CT, or charge time, which is also affected by character speed stat. The actual amount of squares the character can move is determined by job class, skills, and equipment. The player must also manage two statistics called Brave and Faith. Faith is a measure of the character's belief in God and affects the potency of his or her magic and determines how hard he or she will be hit by magic. You can't raise it too high though, or the character will leave the party. Brave measures courage and affects bare hands, for monks, knight swords, and the probability of using most reaction abilities, which are abilities to trigger when a unit is attacked. You can't drop Brave too low or the character will flee from your party out of cowardice. Characters acquire experience points for a base level and job points for every action taken on the field. There are 20 different classes in total, and all of the sprites are unique and each is exquisitely designed. These are the best looking sprites I've ever seen, and most of the classes used in previous installments are represented and expanded upon in Tactics. The base classes are Squire and Chemist. As you gain JP, your class levels up and you unlock more classes that are typically more specialized and often more powerful, or that at least have interesting abilities to tinker with or combine with other classes. None of this is terribly revolutionary until you actually start to build a character. Once you select a specific job, that job's innate skill is always equipped, be it black magic for a wizard or throw for ninjas. But you have the option of equipping another job's skill set and a reaction, support, and movement skill that again can be from your current job or one that you've previously learned. Might sound a little overwhelming at first, but the possibilities are near endless, and this facet of the game is what has kept its fans so enraptured for such a long period of time. If you want your mages to steal items, though I wouldn't recommend this, you're free to do so. If you want a knight that wields black magic, that is also entirely up to the player. There aren't many restrictions placed on how your characters develop and how you can build them. Naturally, with the sheer amount of very specific and wide-ranging abilities, there's bound to be some broken and game-changing combinations. For example, using the Samurai reaction ability, Blade Grasp, that essentially nullifies physical attacks while lowering the faith stat so low that magic attacks are irrelevant. The player has just created an almost untouchable character. Admittedly, this build is quite a bit less problematic than some of the others, but how one views these broken builds is really a matter of preference. While some bemoan these abusive builds, I had a blast trying to find disgustingly powerful ability mixtures. It's also perfectly acceptable and quite a bit more challenging, and probably rewarding, to just avoid these altogether. The modding communities I mentioned at the beginning of the review have also found ways to place stipulations on builds and added themes to party construction to create really trying and interesting ways to play through the game that don't reduce one's experience to the act of acquiring one broken character and winning the game. Magic can unfortunately be one of the most infuriating aspects of the game, at least in my experience. While it has the potential to be devastating, I often found the traditional Magic users to be far less effective than the more gimmicky uses of it. And this is typically due to the amount of turns it takes to cast a spell. By late game, you're often hitting nothing or praying that a unit you've targeted won't move. While I wouldn't suggest that the most powerful spells in the game be instant cast, there could have been a less clunky and punishing way to use magic. I was also quite disappointed by the AI of the guest to join the party. It is abysmal, and I can't recall a single fight that every single guest didn't rush headlong into the thick of the enemy force. Equipment was fairly straightforward, but I was impressed by the various effects items had and the cool interactions with support abilities and just general usefulness most items have. It's just another great example of adding strategic diversity to the game and decisions the player has to make prior to each battle. Much debate has been had over the size of the battlefields and whether they allow for actual tactical diversity or merely facilitate the swarm and kill method. I am of the opinion that, while the AI clearly cheats and knows the exact movements it takes to get in strike range, I found myself contemplating each move and often scrambling for my life and begging for that strike with a 65% chance to land. I lost plenty of battles and had to reassess why and if I needed to employ an entirely different lineup or if my movements left me exposed. While it might not be as strategy based as other games in the genre, most notably Fire Emblem, Vandal Hearts, and even Brigandine, and had some difficulty curve issues, it was certainly an admirable and excellent first attempt by Square, though this wasn't Matsuno's first. He had previously done Tactics Ogre, and Final Fantasy Tactics is often considered its spiritual successor. The score for Final Fantasy Tactics was composed, arranged, and produced by Hitoshi Sakimoto and Masuharu Iwata. It received a lot of comparisons and critical reviews to Uematsu's Final Fantasy compositions. The two composers' works really blended well, and there are as many iconic tracks in this title as there are in any of the numbered entries. The tracks truly added to the tension of each encounter, and more specifically, the boss tracks are all superb. Sakimoto's style is unmistakable, and it's impossible to separate this beautiful OST from the moments it helped to intensify. While it will never get the love or attention of the more popular Final Fantasy titles, Tactics was an incredibly strong first adventure into the strategy RPG genre for Square. The game has some very serious flaws, but some of its idiosyncrasies and peculiarities help to create a very unique and singular experience that is close to unmatched in replayability. I love it for its brokenness while simultaneously recognizing that some loathe it for that very fact. I've played through the game many times and each outing felt distinct due to the various builds and paths available to the player. It was remade for the PSP in 2007 and given cel-shaded cutscenes that only strengthened the already strong graphical presentation and a reworked translation that was universally praised. Still, I vastly prefer the original and all of its busted fun. If you enjoyed the review, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. My Twitter is also located right below the video. This has been Andrew with High Level Reviews, and I appreciate you guys stopping by.